one of my favorite parts of the conference, because we get to honor people that are working tirelessly to do this work, the work that we've been all talking about, and we get to hear from them and learn from them. So I'm going to start off by introducing, Maria Kasumi sorry, it's too early in the morning even for me. I haven't finished my coffee. From Humanity United. Humanity United is an incredible peace-building champion organization, foundation themselves. So we are just thrilled that we get to partner with them. So Maria, I will turn it over to you to introduce the Peacebuilding Champion Award that you sponsor so generously.
Thank you, Liz. Should I put this up? Woo, okay, I'm tall. Thank you, Liz. So where I come from, I always start with a story. Don't worry, it's going to be a very short story. So once upon a time, anyway, last year, the African Union officially adopted Swahili as an official working language. So in that spirit, I will greet you all in Swahili. Habari za asubuhi. Oh, I thought there would be any Kenyans. Anyway, to get to the award, my name is Maria Kisumbi, and I'm the Director for Policy and Government Relations at Humanity United. Thank you for joining us today at PeaceCon. I am excited to be here to present the 4th annual Peacebuilding Champion Award. Preventing, reducing, and resolving increasing global violence and conflict are some of the greatest challenges of our time. In 2018, the world was already experiencing a 30-year high in violent conflict. This year, due to increasing conflict and violence, 1.9 billion people will live in fragile contexts. More than 117 million people will be displaced. And an estimated 339 million people will need humanitarian assistance and protection globally, the highest figure in decades. Additionally, the war in Ukraine is diverting major resources away from renewed conflicts such as that in Sudan, as well as protracted crises, including those in Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Myanmar, and Ethiopia. Although alarming, these trends provide an opportunity to center conflict and atrocities prevention, peacebuilding, and diplomacy in U.S. foreign policy. We have numerous tools to tackle these crises. In recent years, Congress has passed key laws, including the Global Fragility Act, the Women, Peace and Security Act, and the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act, which recognizes the importance of peacebuilding activities to address conflict drivers and to prevent violence and extremism. We are heartened that there's a new generation of congressional champions who are pushing to expand peacebuilding and conflict prevention initiatives. And at this rate, I'm very delighted to honor 2 of them today, Representative Sarah Jacobs and Senator Todd Young. So I will read Representative Jacobs' profile. Before coming to Congress, Representative Jacobs served in the State Department's Bureau on Conflict and Stabilization Operations, where she focused on conflict prevention and response, countering and preventing violent extremism, and U.S. foreign policy in sub-Saharan Africa. She also served as a scholar in residence at the John B. Kroc School of Peace Studies at the University of San Diego, a member of AfP, and as the founding CEO of Project Connect, an international education nonprofit dedicated to connecting students around the world to the internet, which has become a flagship part of UNICEF's work due to its success. She also serves as the caucus leadership representative, representing the Democratic members who have served 5 terms or less at the Democratic House leadership table. At 34 years old, she's the youngest member of Democratic House leadership. Moreover, in her brief tenure, Representative Jacobs has quickly established herself as a leading voice in Congress, working to ensure that the U.S. foreign policy apparatus no longer conducts business as usual. While serving on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, including as the ranking member on the House Subcommittee on Africa, she continues to demonstrate leadership through her unflagging advocacy for the Global Fragility Act, locally led peace building, atrocities prevention and accountability, preventing and countering violent extremism, human rights and democracy, and numerous causes of vital importance to the peacebuilding community. Has sponsored and co-sponsored legislation, travel abroad, and oversight during committee hearings, continues to amplify innovative approaches to address cycles of violence, mitigate adverse effects of conflict, and strengthen social cohesion and resilience. In addition to her work to promote peacebuilding globally, Representative Jacobs has been a key champion of legislative measures to promote gender equality, support veterans and military families, empower children, and protect the environment. She has such an amazing profile and does so much for peacebuilding. Can we at least have a hand clap? So I'll go to the next. Senator Young. We are also delighted to provide Senator Ted Young of Indiana with our bipartisan Peacebuilding Champion Award. Senator Young was an original co-sponsor of the Global Fragility Act and has consistently worked to promote human rights, atrocities prevention and accountability, global food security, unimpeded humanitarian access, and numerous issues of vital importance to the peacebuilding community since he joined the Senate in 2017. Before serving in Congress, he served his country for over a decade in the U.S. Marine Corps and worked as a legislative assistant, management consultant, and assistant deputy prosecutor in Indiana. Senator Young's bipartisan partnership with Senator Cory Booker on the CSIS Task Force on Humanitarian Access, which they co-chaired and included former government and international officials, produced the pivotal report, Denial, Delay, Diversion, Tackling Access Challenges. The report provided concrete policy recommendations to enhance access and improve the fundamental outcomes of U.S. foreign assistance. From his position on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Young has been leading a voice calling for action to address genocide and other atrocities in Burma, China, Ukraine, and beyond. He's currently the ranking member of Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on the Near East, South Asia, Central Asia, and counterterrorism, tackling numerous critical priorities to prevent conflict and violent extremism and promote stability as a key partner and champion of the peacebuilding community. Hand clap. Guys, so at this moment now, I turn you to the TV screens to listen to the welcome remarks from both Senator Young and Representative Jacobs. Thank you. Screens.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I'm so grateful to the Alliance for Peacebuilding for your work to help build a world where everyone is safe, free, and equal, and where communities can build and sustain peace and address conflict without violence. I'm incredibly honored to receive this award today because peacebuilding has been a major focus of my career and my work in Congress. And this summit couldn't come at a more important time. Right now, as you all know, about a quarter of the world's population and nearly 3 in 4 of the world's extreme poor live in communities rife with chronic instability, conflict, or violence. We're still living with the COVID-19 pandemic that we saw fuel inequities, worsen grievances, grow mistrust of government and institutions, and create perceptions of injustices surrounding jobs, healthcare, and livelihoods. And we know that the impact of conflict isn't contained by borders. Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has worsened the threat of hunger and starvation around the world, especially in the Middle East and Africa. In Sudan, violence has erupted between the Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces, forcing Sudanese civilians to bunker in their homes as explosions ricochet around the city and the civilian death toll climbs. The fighting has the potential to spill across borders and destabilize an already fragile region. We know that in today's interconnected world, our own national security is tied to the security, stability, and prosperity of other countries. That's why, in Congress, I'm focused on creating a foreign policy that reflects the world we live in, reflects our values, and actually advances our priorities in the short term, but also the long term. A part of that work is making the case for the importance of foreign aid and assistance, and why it matters here at home. Foreign aid, which is only 1% of our overall budget, has the power to promote good governance, transparency, and economic development in communities in order to prevent conditions that lead to violent extremism, like weak institutions, corruption, and abusive governments and militaries. I'm also pushing for a fundamentally new approach to how the United States addresses conflict around the world, especially because the decades in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia have yielded little gains and in some cases actually made things worse. So even though I wasn't elected yet, I was very excited when Congress passed the Global Fragility Act in 2019 to create and implement an adaptable whole-of-government approach to address, minimize, and prevent the root causes of conflict and instability. I'm so pleased that the Biden administration has recently taken a monumental step forward, sending their 10-year plans to Congress to execute this strategy with Mozambique, Papua New Guinea, Haiti, Libya, and coastal West Africa, including Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Togo. With thoughtful implementation, the Global Fragility Act has the power to modernize our foreign policy and center conflict prevention and peacebuilding into the heart of our strategy. But now, the real work begins, and Congress needs to do our part. We need to provide robust funding for GFA accounts to operationalize these plans and ensure close coordination and joint formulation between the 3Ds: diplomacy, development, and defense. One of the biggest tactics that we can't overlook is the importance of locally led peacebuilding and development. Bringing in people who are involved in and most affected by violent conflict to create solutions is the most effective, efficient, and equitable way to do development work. We want to empower local people, not dictate to them what's best, and in the worst case scenario, perpetuate harmful cycles of colonialism. That means we need to work directly with local entities, both in the design of programs and in the implementation. Local people know how to solve their own problems. They just need the resources to do it, and we can provide that. We know that when it comes to foreign policy and creating long-term peace and stability, there are no easy, quick solutions. And that's why it's so important to have partners inside and outside of government focused on these issues. So thank you again for this award and for your tireless efforts. It's such an honor to be doing this work alongside all of you. Thank you so much.
Good morning, I'm Senator Young. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person today, but I hope that your events have been productive, and I want to extend my best wishes as you meet during this important conference. I'm honored to be named as one of this year's Peacebuilding Championship Award recipients. I'd like to thank the Alliance for Peacebuilding for highlighting not my work, but all of our efforts to sustain peace and end violent conflict. I'm grateful that the Alliance recognized the importance of the Global Fragility Act. The Global Fragility Act was a bipartisan product that pointed out what we all know. Conflicts are not random and are instead often the product of societal, economic, and other factors that, if not addressed, worsen over time and inevitably lead to conflict and violence. This bill would improve the United States' ability to address and reduce the causes of violence around the world. As we ensure that proper implementation of the GFA, I want to work with organizations like yours to ensure that we're tracking the right metrics, monitoring potential hotspots, and doing what we can to head off conflict, all to the benefit of the United States and the American people, including people back home in Indiana. So thank you all for this award and for all each of you do to support and promote peace worldwide. Your time and efforts are critical, and I want you to know that I and many others appreciate your work.
So I just want to say, we have no better Representative Jacobs is our champion on the Hill. She's phenomenal, and her office is incredibly welcoming. Senator Young, we built that relationship with Laura, who used to work with us from Indiana. So it's important to know advocacy and lobbying, to use the people around you and your partners. It's a great way to work and get them energized about these issues. But I have to say, we have some incredible champions on the Hill on these issues. Okay, now I get to my super favorite award, the Local Peace Builder Award. We all talk about locally led. These are people who are doing it. The first recipient, the African Coaching Network. They were established in 2017. They are mentors, trainers. They jump in when there's a crisis. They are all about mentoring and building the skills for social movements in Africa. We met them a couple months ago when you came to AfP, and everybody was blown away by them. Their work is amazing, and we couldn't be more thrilled to honor Maria, she has her own women's organization in Uganda, and she is a member of ACN, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the work, and we're just so thrilled that you're here with us today and that you're doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. My name is Kovia Arnitwe. I am a member of the African Coaching Network, SN. I'm humbled and honored to be before you to receive this word on behalf of my colleagues who must be attending via Zoom, I presume. It is an honor indeed. SCN's mission is to support movements where we are, and that is on the African continent where we have different cultures from different countries, not limited to Uganda, Zimbabwe, DRC, Tunisia, among others. The need to accept the recognition today in line with its theme, the new architecture for today and tomorrow, is that we must believe and respect the wisdom of local communities to push for change. That's why SN coaches are focused on the work that we do in Africa. International support is great, but it cannot come at the expense of local solidarity. We must be humble enough to support with resources and release control. The intersectionality of issues around movement building, women's rights, climate, food security issues cannot be ignored anymore. We must employ a holistic approach. So for those who are funding peace-building work, and for those who are funding social movement building work on trainings, perhaps we need to start to look around issues on rapid response. How about if, for example, someone is running a training back in Uganda, or like my colleague said, I was running a training in 2017 on movement building, and alongside 15 of my trainees, we were arrested. But the funding was to run a training. So when we talk about holistic approach, as we do this work, is to look at the entire ecosystem of what this work actually means. This is what the SCN fraternity is building with our brothers and sisters at home. And we would like to thank you for honoring our work. And we are aware that to whom much is given, more is expected. So there is more work for us to do, and we invite you to walk with us along this journey. Thank you.
And as you can tell, I didn't have my coffee because I was looking at Maria when I said Scovia. She's their work is amazing, and they are under threat every day. And one of the things we learned for your incredible work is that, you know, there's so much to think about that we don't think about your work in terms of your offices being raided and the equipment being taken, and then you need, you know, so there's so many things that we need to think about that we're not thinking about on these on this work. So I want to thank you and get to know her because she's phenomenal. All right, I'm not going to mess up this person's name. Rislana is from Sphere. They're in Ukraine, so they couldn't be here today. Sphere is an organization that we've been working with very closely. They are a women's LGBTQ rights organization and worked on advocacy in Ukraine prior to the war. They work on trauma, they have direct counseling services, and they've had to obviously step up into the humanitarian space. We are so fortunate to have Rislana on video. Sphere.
Just checking if everyone can hear me. Is everything right? I think yes. So, okay, great. Hello everyone. I am very honored to be speaking here today and receiving this award on behalf of our team in Ukraine at Sphere. We're really humbled to be recognized for our efforts. And before I want to tell you a little bit more about us. And we have been working in the field of human rights for women and the LGBTQ people since 2008. So for almost 15 years, we have been strong advocates for queer and women's inclusion. And we work to ensure the development of women's and LGBTQ rights in Ukraine, and more specifically in our region in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is a city located very close, about 30 minutes by car from the Russian border, and the second biggest city in Ukraine. So we have faced numerous challenges and struggles in those years, be it state authorities in Kharkiv or in general in Ukraine, political opponents from different political groups, or the influence of the anti-LGBTQ Russian propaganda. We have still been working nonstop to increase the influence of women and the LGBTQ people in society and empower and mobilize, first of all, vulnerable women and other vulnerable communities. And it's very important for us to be working locally. We're all from Kharkiv, and our work has seen many great changes in this past year. So after the escalation of the war in February, we needed to care for the survival and the mental health of us and our loved ones. And since Kharkiv, as I said, is located very close to the Russian border, our city was one of the first to experience the rapid escalation of this war. And we have heard bombs and rocket strikes and shellings, seen with our own eyes, people fleeing in thousands the city, and yet we managed to continue our work. And we're very proud that we managed to survive as an organization and not even continue our activities, but really expand a lot on what we're doing and be able to help so many people in this past year that we couldn't imagine before. During 2022, we helped over 3,000 people to receive the much needed humanitarian assistance in various forms, and also different forms of psychosocial support. And we're a grassroots organization. So to be recognized as the locally led and grassroots community organization really hits home for us, because it's of utmost importance to tailor our work and our activities to the needs of our communities. And we think in the peace building work, your communities should be your first step to organize your work. And we really value this international recognition, and we are really humbled to receive this award. So for 2023, we plan to continue improving the potential and the capacities of vulnerable women and the LGBT community members in our region and overall in Ukraine. It is essential for us to keep empowering and mobilizing our community so that they can continue to be one of the key drivers for action and also peace building during the war and hopefully in the post-war Ukraine as well. And this award proves to us that we are seen for the world, and our work that we do, on the one hand, so small and local in Ukraine, is seen on such a great scale. And we're very honored to understand that. And Yes, we know that the changes we are creating are seen far beyond our country. We also know that during these difficult times, we remain one of the crucial parts of our city's resistance to the invasion that impacts not only the battlefield and our peace life, but also threatens our democracy and the way of life and our values. And we are working not only to protect our community, but also to protect democracy and protect our values. So the Peacebuilding Award means a lot to us, and thank you so much for recognizing our work.
I will tell you, it's so hard to choose locally led organizations because there's so many amazing ones. But this year, these two organizations really stood out, and for the work that they're doing to build and advance the field as well. Okay, so this last award, and then we'll get right into an incredible panel talking about evidence and how do we make sure that we are using it to build and advance the field, is the Rick Love Award. Rick Love, to know Rick Love was to love him. I mean, his name, never did a name fit somebody. He was an incredible human being. We lost him too soon. He was the executive director for Peace Catalyst, an incredible organization that's working here overseas, but also in the US. And that's one thing, I'm just gonna say this. I know people recognize the fact that we didn't talk about the conflict in the United States yesterday. USIP is a congressionally funded organization to work internationally. So we don't talk about the United States conflicts, the conflict in the United States. But you can here over the next 2 days, and we need to learn from you. So I want a lot of talking about the conflict in the US and the global north. But their work is really to build, this award really honors Rick Love on how to cross those divides and work together. And Martin, you've just stepped into his role, and we love you too. You just don't have the name Love, but we love you too.
Thank you. I'm Martin Brooks. I'm the Executive Director of Peace Catalyst International. Dr. Rick Love was the late founder and president of Peace Catalyst. He was an academic, a theologian, a practitioner, a peace builder. Rick was distressed about the rise of Christian nationalism in the U.S. and around the world, and the promotion of an ideology that, well, specifically within evangelical circles, which was Rick's background, that marginalized Muslims and caused them to be framed as the other. Rick believed that Christianity should be a force for good, a force for peace that addresses injustice and pursues thriving for everyone, even if they didn't identify as Christian. Rick started Peace Catalyst to help Christians learn and embrace peace building as a central tenet of the Christian faith. Rick passed away in 2019, but to honor Rick, we have initiated the Rick Love Peace Awards. Last year, Dr. Miroslav Volf at Yale received the award, and her and Nessa Faryad at the Adams Center, they were recipients. This year, we're pleased to present the 2023 Rick Love Peace Award to Lisa Sharon Harper, who's here on the stage with us. Lisa is the founder and president of Freedom Road, which is dedicated to shrinking the narrative gaps that divide us. I personally, and thousands of others, have rethought our relationship to God and to faith because of Lisa and her work. Lisa is a gifted speaker and activist. She's a prolific writer, including her latest book is Fortune, right? Fortune, how race broke my family and the world, and how to repair it all. There's a book we need to read. Her critically acclaimed book, The Very Good Gospel, How Everything Wrong Can Be Made Right, is a book that we use in training and was transformative for me personally. In these books and through her life, she seeks to replace the destructive narratives with narratives that inspire hope and enable all to thrive. Her message is holistic, restorative, life-giving. Lisa reminds us of Rick. And for that reason, would you join me in welcoming Lisa Sharon Harper as the recipient of the 2023 Rick Love Peace Award.
Wow. It is such an honor to be here with each of you today. Thank you, Peace Catalyst. Thank you to the Alliance of Peacebuilders, Peacebuilding rather. I'm profoundly honored to receive the 2023 Rick Love Peace Award along with Emma Vanderheit-Reiter today. I half expected to see Rick come around the corner, always moving and always deeply rooted in the shalom of God. Rick carried a deep peace in his core that came from intimate communion with our Creator, the creator of the harmony ethic. It is one of the great honors of my life to receive also this award in the lineage of Dr. Miroslav Volf, who was one of my mentors, and with her Inessa Faryad, who were recipients last year. Now, when I was studying human rights at Columbia University in New York City, 2005, American peacebuilders looked outward. We looked to Croatia and Kosovo and Serbia. We looked to Darfur, to Georgia. Those were the places that needed human rights and that peacebuilding focused its attention on. And in 2009, I traveled to Croatia for the third time to participate in a month-long faith-based peacebuilding conference. Yes, it was a month-long conference, y'all, with a group called Renewing Our Minds. I tell you, it really was everything. Now, it was developed, Renewing Our Minds, ROM, was developed by Tihomir Koklia, and he brought together young leaders from all across Europe to train them in the art of peacebuilding in Croatia. And there were Bosniaks and Serbs and Croats. There were Serbians and Kosovaks. There were Christians, Muslims, and Jews. There were Roma. And my roommate and I, we were both American. She was a conservative Republican white woman from Washington State, and I was an African-American, and still am, Democrat, whose mother was a member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and she dated Stokely Carmichael for a hot minute in the 60s. Now, to my surprise, we found that the most intractable divide in that space was between us, the Democrat and the Republican. Today, our democracy hangs by a thread, and we need our elections monitored. Our courts are suffering corruption. We are suffering mass violence in our streets every single day. Peace is broken here. Truth be told, the U.S. has never been a nation of peace. We have never enjoyed healthy democracy. We have never actually had free and fair elections. And thumbs have held the scales of justice in our courts. The United States of America needs peacebuilders and peacemakers across racial, gender, political, and religious walls of hostility. They are not just lines, they are fighting on both sides. We need the ones who protect human dignity around the world to protect it in the vulnerable here. We need peacebuilders and peacemakers to help the U.S. find another way of being together in the world. May we all of us, carry the light and the harmony that we find in this room through the ethic of peace building into every area of the earth, including our own. Amen.
Thank you, Lisa. You can see why we took note. In addition to the Rick Love Peace Award, we're also presenting 2 Rick Love Young Innovator Awards to raise up those new peacemakers for the next generation, to be your partners. The first award goes to Kasia Slavner, who is a gifted director, screenwriter, cinematographer from Canada. Kasia could not be with us, but she will be receiving her award via video in just a moment. Her latest project is 1.5 Degrees of Peace, linking climate change and peace building, which is an area that Peace Catalyst wants to lean into. The second recipient of the Rick Love Young Innovators is here with us, Emma Vandry Heitreiter. She is an MDiv student at the University of Chicago. She worked with Peace Catalyst partner shoulder to shoulder here in DC, combating Islamophobia. Her desire to find the best teachings and practices of Christianity to build peace reminded us of Rick's desire to do the same thing. So it's with great pleasure that Peace Catalyst presents these awards to Kasia Slavner and Emma Vandry Heitreiter, the Rick Love Young Innovators.
It's clear that now more than ever, movements for climate justice and peace need to unify our efforts to create a world that is healthy, equitable, and just for all of humanity. I hope that my storytelling can play a part in catalyzing this. 1.5 Degrees of Peace is a feature documentary following the unfolding stories of youth in regions most hard hit by the impact of climate change, conflicts, and militarism. The film documents their journeys to build bridges between disarmament, peace building, and environmental justice. Thank you so much to Peace Catalyst International and the Alliance for Peacebuilding. I'm incredibly honored to be accepting the Rick Love Young Innovators Award and helping carry forward the legacy of Rick's dedication to intergenerational peacebuilding.
Hi, I'm Emma Vandry Heitreiter, and I'm so grateful to Peace Catalyst International and Alliance for Peacebuilding to be selected for one of the Rick Love Young Innovators Awards. After witnessing grassroots peacebuilding efforts in Palestine, Israel, I've spent the last few years partnering with organizations like Shoulder to Shoulder Campaign and Alamana Center to counter anti-Muslim discrimination and promote interreligious understanding in my Northwest Iowa community. These experiences and my mentors like Nina Fernando, Cassandra Lawrence, and Jeffrey Boss inspired me to commit my life to this work. I'm currently in my first year of a Master of Divinity program at the University of Chicago, where I hope to work toward nonviolent conflict transformation and interreligious cooperation through organizing, advocacy, and scholarship. This award and opportunity to learn from other peace builders at this year's PeaceCon will inspire possibilities for my current work in Chicago and beyond. Thank you again.
So congratulations to our 2023 Rick Love Award recipients. You can learn more about these amazing women by reading their books or getting to know them on the Peace Catalyst website, peacecatalyst.org. There's also a virtual booth where you can interact with them. There'll be links there to some of their work. If your faith inspires you to pursue holistic peace for all, then please talk to me, to Peace Catalyst, about some type of collaboration. We do grassroots training for peace builders, and we even have career opportunities for you, so come join us. I want to thank Liz Hume and Alliance for Peacebuilding for giving us this opportunity to honor our founder, Rick Love, and to acknowledge the amazing recipients of the Rick Love Peace Award.
So thank you for honoring with us these incredible people. Please, they're here. Get to know them throughout the day. I just want to say, Lisa, I leaned over and said to Martin, we needed that this morning. I would only say one other thing. We need to cross the divide also in the parties, in both Democrats, Independents, Republicans, within intra-group work as well here in the U.S. So it's the only thing I would disagree with. So now I'm going to bring on stage, and I'm going to go get some coffee and try to not make mistakes with people's names. Jessica Baumgartner-Zuzik is, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, she's beyond amazing. None of this would have happened without her. And I can't even say enough about how amazing she is. I had so many people come up to me yesterday saying, you know, she's brilliant. She is brilliant. And we are so fortunate to have her at AfP, and she makes coming to work fun, and she's a dear friend. So, Jessica, come on up.
Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to invite our plenary, high-level plenary speakers to the stage. If you could come to the side. Well, thank you all so much for coming to day 2 of PeaceCon 2023. I'm really excited to be on this incredible panel of speakers who not only do I admire, but have worked with and looked at their work for many, many years before coming to AfP. So I'm very pleased to be joining. We also do have digitally, who will be appearing on screen as well, calling in from OECD. So we're really excited for this panel today. So we're going to be talking about one of the things that you've probably all heard me drone on about if you've engaged with me at any point in time, all
2015, and it was really walking through northeast. Right. Hey, how's that? Yay. Am I loud now? All right, so I really got involved in peace in about 2015. We've got a family foundation which works with the poorest of the poor. So I was in northeast Kivu in the Congo, walking through there, and thought, what are the most peaceful nations in the world, and was there anything I could learn from them? To my surprise, there was nothing which ranked the nations of the world by their peacefulness, and that started on my journey to peace. But if I went back then, the concept of peace was pretty qualitative. A lot of the time it was quite morally based, which is a very, very good place to start, but very little quantitative stuff, particularly when it's used with mass. The other thing which I noticed, there was nothing in economics. Like, peace was really very, very much a moral argument, and in those days, most people, particularly in business, thought that war was good for business, where in actual fact it's exactly the opposite. So now, what I've seen in the progression over time, and like there's some other great organisations here which are now developing excellent metrics on peace. So in that time we've developed things like the Global Peace Index that's now used by all major international institutions. If you went into the Secretary General's office and they're doing future planning, looking at sensitive areas, the Global Peace Index is used in all those analyses. We developed the Global Terrorism Index. That's used by all the major intelligence agencies around the world. We've got strategic relationships with, let's say, people like the UN Office on Counter-Terrorism. We've moved into the ecological threat area, so that's moving not so much into climate change, but the ecological threats which are there today, and then bringing the nexus of that and the way that feeds back into competition. So that's a little bit of our evolution over time. But what I can see is we're moving forward now. We're starting to get many, many, many better ways. How long have I got to talk for?
You have 5 minutes. I'm going to say 3 now.
Okay, 3 now, yeah. There you go. Okay, you've always got to shut me up when I get going, particularly on subjects like this, which I'm passionate about. I can just keep going. So what we're finding as we're moving forward, we're getting many and many better ways now to be able to actually capture statistics. So some of these are the news. So you'll find databases like ACLIC, which are built off news stories. Survey data, I'm working with an organisation now which is going to use biometric markers to measure people's personal peace. We'll be able to deploy that in 200 communities around the world to understand which communities actually where the people have the highest levels of personal peace. So it's new ways of being able to do it. And we're looking forward to, we're getting, particularly in Africa, you're starting to get better and better statistics coming out of the national offices. And so a lot of the time these get rolled up into data sets we used at the World Bank, other different statistical agencies as well, OECD and such. So I think as we move forward, and I'll stop now because there's an awful lot more I could say on the future of where we can capture data, but I'll leave it there and pass it over to the next speaker, eh?
I was told that people were having a hard time hearing me, which I don't think has ever occurred in my life, so I'm going to keep kind of almost chewing on the microphone here. Apologies. I'm going to turn to Paul Turner. I'm going to ask you the same question. From your experience with the Fund for Peace, can you talk a little bit about the developments you've seen across the field in reference to data and evidence?
Sure. The Fragile States Index started about 18 years ago, and in that time, I think there's been an ongoing revolution that has not stopped, and I think we're looking at some really exciting developments now that have come online just in the last year or two. I think that the biggest change, if you go back a couple of decades, is just the amount of data that's available to all of us. It's at our fingertips, whether we're talking about on our phones or computers. The quantitative information has just exponentially grown in that time period. And I think the other big shift that's taken place is how we interact with the data itself. And so if you think about what you might have been used to seeing then, people were like cutting and pasting maps together and things like that. And now we've got the ability to use GIS. I'm sure some of the organizations here in the room regularly are using SMS polling in order to get input from local organizations and to be able to vacuum up data in some unique ways that are much less labor intensive than they used to be. At Fund for Peace, we often are involved in stakeholder network analysis and doing relational mapping, and so being able to take that data and work through different ways of visualizing it to make it more user-friendly is something that I think has shifted a lot. And then I think we can look at some of the more recent shifts, not from 10, 15 years ago, but from the last 5, 10 years, and that is just kind of the onset of algorithms to help us really figure out how to process data. And then now, as we look at the impact of AI and the ability to play around with ChatGPT or Bing Chatbot or some of these other tools that are out there, which really, for our organization, I think are incredibly exciting, but also a little bit stressful because we don't have the bench of 100 scientists that can play around with this and figure it out. But we recognize that if we can figure out how to crack that code, it's going to allow us to open up a whole new world of possibility of really being able to take the data and delve into the nuances that it can present when you really wrestle with it. I'll maybe touch on just one more quick thing, and that is I think that there's some really interesting challenges for users out there when you look at all this data that's swirling all around us, whether we choose to pursue it or not. With the Fragile States Index itself, I think that we're often plagued with really trying to help users understand what it is. Like we're able to take data, as others here in the room do, and package it in different ways. And it really just presents a snapshot. It's not meant to be used for forecasting. It's not meant to drive decisions or help plan. And so we've been, I think, concerned about the messaging that we give around our packaging of the data that we share with the world, and have tried, as a result of that, to try and evolve what tools that we're able to offer. And so a result of that has been the sense kind of over the last few years that it's really not just about fragility, because you can have incredibly fragile countries, for example, that are quite resilient and able to withstand really severe shocks. And other places that aren't particularly fragile start to crumble in the face of those shocks. So we developed the State Resilience Index as a way of complementing that one set of data that we had already. And then in order to kind of capture those two components together and to do what I think a lot of our policymaker colleagues are really driven toward, and asking ourselves the question of what if or what's coming, we've tried to be able to present different levels of shocks based on the data that we have and what might happen over the next 5 years. We're really careful to say we're not predicting the future. And there are tools that are doing this in different ways that are out there. But I think it's a real challenge for users to look at the data that's out there and be able to say, what I really want to do is figure out how to plan, and what's the tool that's able to harness the data to move that forward. Or what I'm really trying to do is understand what's happening right now. And so I think we as a community have a responsibility, not just to each other, but to the world around us, to be able to help everybody understand what data is that they're looking at and how they might be able to use it to advance their goals.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. As someone who used to piece together those maps, you know, cutting out your icons and then trying to color it in, I very much am appreciative of the advances we've made. I do want to also note that we were able to get Eloise on the screen, and she will be cued in here, so that is our fifth speaker, and I'm so happy she was able to join us. But I'm going to actually transition to Alicia here, and I'd love to learn a little bit about, you know, from you. You have such a impressive career, but spanning many different components of these high-impact international development areas, really thinking about how do you translate data and some of what Paul was saying into actual programming? How do we use that to inform what we're really doing day to day?
Great. No, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm actually really glad to follow you directly. So I'm working at the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and we're the interloper in the room right now. Like, the word peace isn't in our title. There's nothing. Millennium Challenge, a U.S. federal agency that makes giant investments in poverty reduction through economic growth. I think that's unusual. but we take really seriously the role we play in addressing the economic dimensions of resilience. And we understand that to be a piece of what it is that when MCC puts $500 million into a country's economic infrastructure, it is about enabling people to participate in their economy in a way that makes the country more resilient and facilitates peace and reduces conflict. So that's real to us. We are also deeply evidence-focused. So by mandate, we're required to use evidence and data in a variety of ways. And in fact, we actually have used the Fragile States Index. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how we take that seriously and how it translates into actually some decision-making. And then we're both consumers and producers of data, and we understand that as a meaningful role. So I'm really actually excited to join and to spend the remaining 4 minutes saying that. One, on the Fragile States Index, I actually was a policy officer about 18, 17 years ago at MCC. So I'm the VP now, but I was working in the department that uses still a data-driven process to identify the countries MCC can partner with. And there's a bunch of rules, it's all publicly available. We can talk more about that in a minute. But I used the early, what was called failed states index, to show the similarities between a conflict in a country that doesn't get a lot of media coverage and the conflict in a country that was in the news all of the time, because I needed the Secretary of State, the USAID Administrator, the Trade Rep, and the Treasury Secretary to understand whether we could reasonably work in this country or not. And I got in serious trouble because I was told that I had not, you're not supposed to talk about states as having failed. So, but it was the early days and it was early understanding, and people didn't see that you could use this to not make your decision for you, but to help you understand what would be the implication of what you were receiving when you stepped into the decision and the range of things you might be able to do. So fast forward 17 or 18 years, we now have just been through an exercise of using the now Fragile States Index. We haven't got to the resilience one yet. In looking at how we should think about working with Congress to expand the pool of countries MCC is allowed to work in, and recognizing that there are lots of different types of fragility and there are lots of different types of needs and economic drivers of fragility that MCC as an agency may be able to address. So we actually stacked up across each of the 10, I think, different categories. What are the 100 most subject to this type of fragility? And use that as a big piece of our conversation with members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate. And a piece of legislation was introduced earlier this week, and another one marked up in the Senate, actually looking at how we can expand this pool. And so, it's in part use of this data to drive a decision-making, and now an ongoing conversation in the legislative branch as well. So the data consuming side has really evolved a lot, and I'm proud of MCC for kind of being not at the coal face of that, but at the place where there's a lot of light and heat. The thing I do want to show, and I don't think I got 1 minute. Okay.
Hey, well, would you like to show your slides?
Actually, if I can.
Yes.
And they told us no slides, but I hate when we talk about data and no one gets to see anything at all, and I'm not making a data presentation. I said we're big both producers and consumers and producers of data, and the production side is important to us too. We think it's a big piece of accountability and sharing information about what has worked with our partners, what has not worked. We work really closely with country counterparts and partners for them to determine what we are going to invest in, and we evaluate every project. So we've built an evidence platform. It's evidence.mcc.gov. It is where all of our evaluations live. We use them the same way anyone else can. There's not like a secret hidden database somewhere that only MCC staff can get to. So you will find evidence in here of things that we didn't do right. Places where it didn't work out, we didn't get the results we expected. You will find countries where actually something dramatic changed halfway through, and that had a major effect on what we were doing and the way we were able to do it. But the slides are there because you can see it's possible to search by region. If you click to the next one, you'll see you can search by the actual name of the investment, the country-specific nature of it, by sectors, by a variety of things. If you look at the next one, you'll see you can also search by word. So if you want to find all the references to fragility or resilience or urbanization or natural disaster or conflict, you can search by that. And if you hit the next slide, you'll see you actually get a substantial number of results. When you search for fragility, you get results across Sahelian West Africa, across Central America, across parts of Asia. And so we're really proud of this because it's a composite place in which it is possible to learn what kinds of things have been tried to reinforce economic resilience and what we can take away from it. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I want to repeat that in case you guys didn't write it down. Evidence.mcc.gov. I had fun playing on the dashboard earlier this week when I received it, so I definitely encourage you to take a look. Well, thank you so much, Alicia. I'm going to turn to Eloise, who's on screen with us, joining us digitally, and she's going to talk a little bit for us about some of the successes and challenges that she's encountered translating data to action in an active conflict zone on the ground, as well as thinking about how do we translate data into policy from her work now working with OECD. So Eloise, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, and I'm just checking everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I would start by saying that translating data into action in the field or in a conflict zone has some particularly unique challenges. When I worked as a field analyst for the UN peacekeeping mission in Mopti in central Mali, a major challenge was the physical constraints on data collection. So there was increasing insecurity, which constrained our ability to conduct field visits. The fear of reprisal attacks made it a very sensitive thing for locals to share information. And jihadist groups frequently destroyed telecommunications infrastructure to prevent further contact between local communities and the UN or the state. So to mitigate this, we held information sharing meetings with the UN country team to discuss, for example, the socio-security situation in the various sub-regions. And our limited quantitative data for those remote areas could be enhanced through these qualitative insights and assessments, for example, from the humanitarians who had greater familiarity with certain localities. I'd say there's also a strategic value in this systematized information sharing across the humanitarian development peace nexus, particularly when it feeds into joint assessments. In this case, the UN agencies could point to a mutually agreed, jointly prioritized assessment, which had buy-in across the UN country team to then help galvanize funds from donors. Data visualization was also key. In Mopti, when we were providing a color-coded map of the key hotspots, that was useful for helping the leadership quickly grasp the difficult situation on the ground and where best to concentrate resources. But I would also say data visualization can be risky if it distorts a message. And a concrete example for this from my time in Mopti was that our data suggested a reduced number of violent attacks in some remote regions of central Mali where jihadist groups had consolidated control. But our inability to collect data against indicators in those places meant we were unable to prove that this decreased violence came at the expense of the community's human rights abuses, human rights and their social freedoms. And so data visualization through a color-coded map of hotspots didn't necessarily capture that nuance. And so my point is then that without clear caveats or additional data to help contextualize information, there's a risk that data visualization can create misleading narratives, and that can lead to misinformed interventions. Moving to the OECD, where I now work in the crises and fragility team. So for those who don't know, we produce the flagship biannual report called the States of Fragility. For this, we use data linked to 57 indicators to analyze the balance of risks of fragility and coping capacities across 176 countries. And in doing so, we hope to inform an understanding of the drivers and consequences of fragility and help inform prioritization and resource allocation at the level of donor capitals. But a key challenge we confront here is accurately measuring and communicating the complexity of fragility. Failure to capture that complexity can ultimately lead to interventions that focus overly on symptoms instead of root causes, or that treat root causes as monocausal. And so to enable donors specifically to better understand and action such complex data, our approach has been to create a multi-dimensional framework. And we recently updated that framework so that it now measures fragility across 6 dimensions: economic, environmental, human, political, security, and societal. And what we found is that this multidimensional disaggregated approach helps policymakers and practitioners to better grasp the complexity and the nuances of a country's fragility, which isn't always captured by media headlines or coverage. It also helps identify diverse entry points for donors to address specific risks to fragility, but also to enhance diverse sources of resilience. It allows us to go beyond the traditionally state-centric political or security dimensions to understand the state as part of a broader system of influencing fragility. And finally, and to finish up, it allows us to identify the macro level trends across fragile contexts and reveal the connections between sources of fragility. So for example, the States of Fragility 2022 highlighted a strong association between food insecurity, debt distress, and fragility, or between fragility and low tax to GDP ratio. And a final point I would make is about transparency. We believe that transparency is critical to data use and ensuring it translates to action. And our framework therefore uses only publicly available data as opposed to commercially available data. And we publish, I think we're one of the only institutions that publishes our underlying data and our code so that anyone can see that and understand it. I'll finish there, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eloise. A lot of really great points there. And I'm actually really excited at the order that we went through because I'm going to hand it over to Christian to talk to us a little bit more about the Peace Accords Matrix Columbia Barometer and how you are using contemporaneous monitoring, collecting data on the ground, working with policymakers in country and in the US. How is that working? What are challenges that you're seeing in terms of incorporating all these great data sets as well as on the ground work?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to be among peace builders. Well, the challenge is a challenge similar to that we have been facing since the first day of our project. It's similar to what Paul was mentioning before in the sense of how to manage and to process a large amount of data. And just to mention that for us, and according to our research, the 2016 Colombian Peace Accord is the most comprehensive peace accord ever signed. It's a 300 pages long peace accord. We identified 578 commitments inside of this peace accord, which makes really complex to monitor it, and creating a methodology and a workflow that allows us to monitor that information as part of that challenge. But I also wanted to introduce 3 lessons that we learned from these, from tackling this challenge. Those 3 lessons are the first one, how to build an multidisciplinary team. The second one being establishing effective communication tools. And the third one is developing automated workflow for effective research. So the first lesson related to a multidisciplinary team, we have been lucky enough since the beginning of trying to build a team with different knowledge regarding land reforms, to DDR, to transitional justice, to intersectional approaches that allows us to comprehend the complexity of the peace accord, and it also allows us to ask the right questions to the right people and to produce the right analysis. It is also important that they are able to create multiple relations with all the actors in charge or involved in the implementation of the peace accord. So now this allows us to translate the data that we produce, for instance, into policy. Specifically, back in 2018, we were able, with our data and the submatrix that we produced for the gender approach, to support the Colombian government to create the gender indicators for their own monitoring system of the implementation of the peace accord. But also having or putting that information into action was possible because we were able to make public our reports that in the beginning were were just for the negotiating parts and not available for the public. And just like my colleagues here were saying before, it is very important for us to generate accountability on the monitoring process, and what better accountability than the civil society being able to access this information. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is it's related to establishing effective communication tools. And this is a two-sided lesson. One that goes outside is how do we present this information. So we've been learning and iterating over the years on how to present information. So now we have specific reports, just like the gender report that we present last week in Popayán in Colombia, but we also have a comprehensive yearly report that we're going to present during this summer, and other kind of reports and specific briefs that we do with all the stakeholders, but also all the pedagogy that accompanies those reports. So it's not just giving that information, but how we can make possible that if that information is translated into accountability for the monitoring, for civil society, or for specific lessons and challenges and recommendations, either for government or for international accompaniment. So that's the lesson on communication external, but the internal was also creating a correspondence between the team, because we have a team in Colombia, located in Colombia, but also we have a team at Notre Dame here in Indiana. So how do we create this constant communication that allows us to have research that balance quantitative and qualitative side, but also that doesn't keep track of our research? Because, as I mentioned before, it's a lot of information, and you can be easily lost between, for instance, the actions that the government or the institutions of the states need to implement due to its missionality, but much different are the actions that need to be implemented related to the peace accord implementation. So we created a tool that allows us to have this constant communication, and of course we don't see each other that much, so we can talk all the time on how to interpret the implementation of the peace accord. The third lesson that sums up to the two other ones that I mentioned before, so we have an excellent team, multidisciplinary, the communication tools, but we also create a methodology and a workflow that is already established, and I'm not going to dig in that, but to the idea that this process can also change and iterate. So we are now automating part of that process to focus more on analysis and not just going beyond the question of what are we going to do with this amount of information, but what now is how are we going to use it. So we're creating new tools, different tools, besides the ones that we already have. So data visualization is really important for us right now, because we have very specific programs related to regional development, but also other programs that requires an insane amount of time to analyze. And it's, for instance, this is specific regional one is over 32,000 initiatives in 117 municipalities, which is a lot of information. And what we are creating is just dashboards that allows us to see the big picture, but even if we want just to check out in a specific context and see the difference between the implementations difference and variations and gaps between those contexts too, which is super cool. And it's also a tool that allows our team to generate more insights and to put those insights to action and to policies too. Another important part is that we continue generating data management systems, just to the usual mixed methods research tools, but also new knowledge management platforms that allows us to have in a single space all the knowledge that we are gathering. So this is really important because implementation of a peace accord is not static, it changes with time. So we can see in a single place how a specific commitment has changed from the beginning of their implementation until 7 years later, which is the moment that we are right now in implementation. So all these three lessons in the end help us to tackle the challenge of how to process that information, but more important, it gave us, to our team in Colombia, new data insights that otherwise would take too long time to produce. So it gives them the ability to have critical information available instantly. Thank you very much.
Well, it's just really interesting to me as I sit here and reflect upon all the great insights that each of you have shared, not only how far the field really has come, even in the 6 or I think 7 PeaceCons I've been a part of, that this is a panel where we're not just like, well, we think we can do this, or maybe we'll do this, but here are 5 unique examples of active databases and data sets and analysts who are applying what we're learning in the field to not only put that out transparently, to hold ourselves accountable, to inform policies, but also to influence funding and on the ground work and how we integrate in, you know, as Christina was saying, CSO responsibility, building local capacity wherever that may be, to really make sure that the data we're investing in, we're working on, is getting into the hands of those who can use it and can apply it. So I am going to take 10 minutes of moderator privilege here because I know we're a little delayed, but that still gives us a break before our next session. And I want to pose to the panelists 2 questions. I am going to ask you, and this was a prompt previously provided, in 1 sentence, which I know is unfair, to each question, if you can give your response. I would very much, we'll go in the order of the presentations previously, but what really kind of spurred this conversation was not only looking back, but also looking forward. So we've heard a little bit about some of the challenges that each of them, not only the progress we've made to date, but areas we're still struggling with, areas we've overcome. You know, a recent Insider Philanthropy article asked, in a world beset by conflict, could better ways to measure peace change the funding equation? And I think this is a really interesting question, given as, I think right here, as I said, we have 5 very unique, concrete examples of great ways that we are measuring peace. Sometimes we're getting distorted in the message or the interpretation or the accessibility, but we are actually applying that, I think, in really innovative ways that hasn't always been the case. So in 1 sentence for each question, what do you see is the biggest challenge right now related to using all of this data? So what's our biggest challenge to use it? And in 1 sentence, what do you see as our greatest opportunity or tool to address this challenge? This could be something new, this could be something on the horizon that we're just starting to figure out. But biggest challenge and what's our greatest opportunity? So I'm going to hand it to Steve.
All right, okay, it's a tall order. 1 sentence. So what I'd say first up is the gap between good policy and decision making. So if you look at so we've got the information, but the policymakers seldom act on it. Look at the Ukraine, for example. Putin had really studied the data, he wouldn't have invaded the Ukraine. I guess that's the first one. The second thing is what I'd say is the biggest way, or the most fundamental way I think to be able to impact decision making is the relationship between the economic arguments and the data. So a lot of the time the decisions makers will be guided by morals, but in the end they quite often come down to quite pragmatic decisions, and so a lot of the work we've done is about the economic value of peace, and you can take that down, you can drive it down in all sorts of different ways. I'll just take 10 seconds. With this year's Global Peace Index, we'll be putting out a paper which looks at the cost of a blockade on Taiwan. $2.7 trillion to the global economy, 2.8% of GDP. That's a blockade, not a war.
I grew up in the South, so I'll embrace Faulkner style in my sentence. So I think for me, probably the biggest challenge is there's a lot of noise out there, and trying to sort through the noise into the data that matters, to recognize the complexity and how overwhelming that is for those of us that are maybe a little more used to dealing with complexity than others that might be in separate fields that we're constantly communicating with, and also kind of the increasing levels of skepticism around data because of the constant manipulation that's taking place. And so trying to find ways to drive through that and to address all of our implicit biases that exist as we wrestle with data. So those would be mine.
Any
In terms of opportunities, sorry, also another run-on sentence here. So I think for opportunities, I really appreciated what somebody said earlier about the importance of transparency. I think that that's vital. I think that the more that we're able to embrace humility as we deal with both what we know and accept and recognize and publicize what we don't know is really important as well. That we should be working to build trusted relationships and take advantage of the fact that we have a world of people that want to know more and want to be able to access the data and understand it. And so how can we cultivate that shared experience and that built relationship between the data providers and the data users?
Thank you so much.
All right, challenge in one sentence, and I'm going to do this so we don't get weird feedback, if that's all right. Challenge in one sentence. People are not always ready or able to see the evidence base or the facts that data is presenting. That is the single biggest challenge at any time, space, location I have ever tried to use data with other people. That was an addendum. Biggest opportunity. Explaining things is the solution to that problem. And we have just been through a period in which people are able to talk to each other across spaces and communities that we didn't have before because we found a way to do it with technology. Technology is not the solution, but actually people using it is, potentially. Period.
Thank you so much. It gives us a great segue to Eloise, who's on screen.
Thank you. Just checking I can be heard. I would say one of the biggest challenges is bringing data sets together. And by that, I mean bringing the more macro level data together with data obtained at the national or subnational level. It's that missing middle piece. And of course, you know, we have these different data sets that are tooled for different purposes. They use different data, they have different analytical questions that they're seeking to address and different purposes. However, I think that there is something to say about the ability to bring them together, have them complement each other, and thereby increase the coherence and the effectiveness of policy and programs at both levels. And I think in terms of solutions for that, there are already some opportunities for feeding the macro level data, for example, the OECD framework, down to the local level. We could, for example, explore the idea of merging and adapting it in some form with the data collected by the Joint Mission Analysis Centres, the JMAC of UN peacekeeping missions. We could think about encouraging desk officers and embassies more to use those data frameworks to better understand the dynamics in their context. We can think about using those frameworks as independent inputs for country platforms and help provide sort of a multidimensional sources of risk and resilience for those country platforms. And then in terms of feeding information up from the local level to the higher level, HQ level, we can think about perhaps more systematic information sharing, such as quarterly stock takes between the field level staff and the HQ level around how they see local level fragility and understanding the priority alignments there.
Our project doesn't measure impact, measure the implementation of a peace accord, but it's the impact that our work do is what is important in terms of action for civil society and also for policy. So the ways that you present that information and then did you make it available to the public, I think that it continues being the challenge for our field, and how do we present it to the different audiences that we need to make it available. And what's the opportunity there is that we can work, again, as our table mentioned it before, we can work collaboratively in ways to create new tools and new products to present this information. So it's something that sometimes we can think that requires too much time, to do it, but the invitation and another great lesson that we learned within the Barometer Initiative project is just to iterate and learning during practice. So we don't need to wait until our next report to know what's the new messages and the new recommendations and the new points that we need to add there, but we can do it now, right? Until the next time, and then we need to change something else, but it's always iterating and working on the process that we can continue advancing in this field.
Thank you. Well, please join me in a big round of applause for our panelists.